I felt I stumbled a couple of times. Yeah, I think now is the time to make a cup of tea.
Thank you. So in Parliament today was tabled the Joint Committee report looking at medical assistance in dying where mental illness is the sole underlying condition. We agree with the conclusion that the committee has come to, that the system is at this time not ready and more time is required. On the question of whether or not there's equivalency between mental and physical suffering, I don't think there's any question that there is equivalency. The question here is one of readiness.
After repeated delays, the government announces the law will be postponed a further 3 years to March 2027.
I was relieved. I was actually glad and appreciative that the government took a sober look and stepped back from the brink. I do recognize that there are people who are going to be disappointed. I feel it's very unfortunate that the narrative they've pushed is that the only way we can help you is by providing MAID, because then when that gets taken away, that represents yet another disappointment. People are genuinely suffering, but maybe the questions we honestly as a society need to ask first is, how do we actually help people live better?
Since last filming with John, he has been taken into hospital after a fall at home. He's still processing the news.
I was sitting at home watching TV, and I saw that the government was now booted it to whatever year, and I was shocked. I felt beaten. I felt that I had lost. We are now not treated as equals. We're not treated as a person with a physical illness. We are now have to fight this battle all over again because of that government decision. It's a stamp saying you're mentally ill, you don't matter. And that's been the attitude towards the mentally ill for generations. It makes it harder for people to live with mental illness and be open about it. It's a secret illness now, and it's pushed further under the carpet.
If you are suffering distress or despair and need support, you could speak to a health professional or an organisation that offers support. Details of help available in many countries can be found at Befrienders Worldwide, www.befrienders.org.
Hello there. There's the potential for further tornadic activity developing across North America. We're keeping a close eye on that from this area of low pressure. Classic conditions, the cool air that's behind that front bumping into some very warm, moist air coming up through the Gulf of Mexico. So a lot of heavy rain, potential for hail, thunder, maybe some tornadic activity in those favoured areas. To the east of that, it's quieter. To the west of that, a weather front pushing in to British Columbia. Now, this weather front here across South America affecting Paraguay, southern Brazil, the dividing line between heat to the north of that and slightly below average temperatures across Chile and into Argentina at the moment. Into Europe, we've got a west-east divide with some wet weather pushing across Spain up through France. We've got some warmth, though, driving its way up across Africa into Eastern Europe with temperatures above average through Germany and Poland. Over into Africa, the same weather front producing a few sharp showers into Morocco. Heavy rain easing from Tanzania, but we'll need to keep an eye on some very wet weather across the far north of Madagascar. A few scattered showers across the Middle East over the next few days, developing in Saudi and drifting their way steadily east. Not as heavy or as widespread as the rain that we saw earlier on in the month. Heat very much the feature across South Asia at the moment, particularly northeastern states, particularly moving up through Odisha and West Bengal. Temperatures in excess of 40 degrees. Red alerts are in force. Heavy rain still very much a feature across central and southern areas of China. We'll see some wetter weather pushing into Japan. That will bring a drop in temperature after extreme heat, but we still got extreme heat across Vietnam, Cambodia and the Philippines. Quiet weather story across Australia at the moment, largely fine. Quite chilly through the night. We've seen our first season frost, and we've got some weather fronts approaching the South Island, which will arrive later in the week.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Israel's foreign minister says his country's military could suspend its planned incursion into Rafah if hostages are released. An MP from the UK's ruling Conservative Party defects to Labour, saying he disagrees with his party's health policies. A plane linked to the Tesla chief Elon Musk has landed in Beijing, where he's reportedly meeting Chinese officials to discuss electric vehicles. And a gold pocket watch worn by the wealthiest passenger on the Titanic sells for 6 times the asking price. Hello, I'm Catherine Byaruhanga. We start in the Middle East, where efforts are being made to try to bring about a ceasefire in southern Gaza. Israel's foreign minister has said a planned ground assault on the southern city of Rafah could be suspended if a deal emerges to free the hostages still held by Hamas. Israel Katz said their freedom was a top priority. Hostage release also forms a key part of international mediation efforts to bring about a ceasefire in the Gaza war. Hamas has posted a new video which shows 2 of the hostages captured during its October attack. Keith Seigel and Omri Miran both identify themselves. While the video is not dated, there is a reference to the recent Passover holiday. It's the second such video that Hamas, considered a terrorist group by the UK and US governments, has published in the past few days. Our correspondent Anna Foster sent this update from Tel Aviv.
Omri Miran's father was actually already on the list of confirmed speakers for this event tonight. When he got up on the stage, he talked about the moment. He said he was sitting having coffee with someone and talking about his grandchildren when the man that he was talking to held his phone and said, "Look, here's a video. They've released a video of Omri." Now, what was also interesting as the crowd were gathered here tonight is they showed that video in full. It's not something that normally happens because, of course, when you see the people in it, the 2 men in this case looking very malnourished, obviously speaking under duress, sending messages to their families and urging the Israeli government to come to some sort of arrangement, some sort of deal to try and achieve their release. Now, of course, that deal and those talks have been going on for weeks and weeks now. The last time we saw a significant hostage release was at the end of last year. At one point, we were told the talks had really very much broken down. The 2 sides weren't really in communication at all. But the Egyptian delegation's visit this week and the further efforts of the US and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, we're sort of led to believe, the briefings are, that perhaps they're moving slightly closer in terms of trying to achieve a deal. But certainly those powerful messages that we heard on the stage tonight from the hostage families, they were talking directly to Israel's leaders, directly to the politicians, and they were saying you need to do a deal. While they're still alive, while we know that our loved ones are still alive, you need to do what they can to ensure their release now.
Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to travel to Saudi Arabia on Monday as negotiations between Israel and Hamas remain in limbo. This will be his 7th trip to the Middle East since the war began. It is part of President Biden's efforts to encourage a ceasefire and prevent the conflict from spreading. He will also call for the release of hostages from the October the 7th attack. Well, for analysis on this, we can now speak to Dr. Aaron Bregman from the Department of War Studies at King's College London. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Let's start with the 2 hostage videos released by Hamas. What do you think it's trying to achieve?
Well, first of all, very good news for the families, because they can see that the loved ones are still alive. And the message of Hamas is basically, here you have the hostages, and you, Israeli government, should compromise. It is also a message to the American administration, because one of the hostages got an American nationality. So Hamas pressure on Israel, on the Americans, and on the Israeli public. So the Israeli public put pressure on the Israeli government to compromise.
And do you think that will work? Will the pressure be enough to get the Israeli government to compromise?
Well, the main bone of contention is the Hamas demand that Israel stop the war and allow Palestinian refugees to move from the southern part of the Gaza Strip to the north. If Israel stops now, it's not going to achieve its aim. So it is tough for the Israeli government politically to accept the Hamas demands.
And we've also been hearing in the last couple of days of a visit by Egyptian mediators to Israel. There seems to be some kind of optimism that there might be a deal reached between Israel and Hamas. What's your reading on that?
The Egyptians are important because they have an interest that Israel stop its military operation and not go into Rafah, because Rafah is very close to Egypt. And if Israel operates in Rafah, there is the danger that many Palestinian refugees will just move into the Sinai, which is Egyptian territory.
And we also heard from the Israeli Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, saying that Israel wouldn't stage an invasion of Rafah if hostages were released. Do you think the Israeli government ever planned on invading Rafah?
The Israelis did move forces, a division, closer to Rafah. This, I believe, is in order to put pressure on Hamas to compromise. If you don't compromise with us, Hamas, we will move into Rafah. But they are not there yet. In Rafah, there are 1.2 million Palestinian refugees. If the Israelis want to operate in Rafah, they have to evacuate the refugees first. It will take them between 4 and 6 weeks to do that. So the tanks are ready, but I don't think that they're going to start the engines and move into Rafah anytime soon.
You talk about evacuating over 1 million people who are now in Rafah. Just how possible is that going to be?
Well, it's going to be a big operation, and the first sign for it will probably be when the Israelis drop leaflets over Rafah telling them to move to Han Yunis or to another area which is close to the sea. It's a big operation. It's going to be very messy.
And just what are the conversations within the Israeli government, if we're hearing of any of these conversations, or within Israel itself about the impact of such an operation on the people there? Many of them have been displaced several times over the past 7 months, and are the prospect that they would have to move again?
Again, I believe that there is low probability that the Israelis will operate in Rafah. There is strong American pressure on the Israelis not to operate there, including hints that we, the Americans, will not provide you with the weapons necessary to operate there. So, in my view, it's not going to happen, at least not now. It is just a way the Israelis try to put pressure on Hamas to compromise.
Dr. Aaron Bregman, thank you for joining us on BBC News. Hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters have gathered at the building hosting the annual White House Correspondents Association dinner in Washington, where President Biden gave a speech. Some wearing vests with the names of Palestinian journalists killed in Gaza lay down on the ground in front of the venue as guests filed in. More than 20 Palestinian journalists this week issued an open letter urging their American colleagues to boycott the dinner. Meanwhile, police have moved in on a pro-Palestinian protest at Northeastern University in Boston. Officials said about 100 people were detained as they were moved from the site. Those with student identification will not face any legal action. It's the latest standoff in a wave of pro-Palestinian sit-ins at campuses around the United States, including this demonstration, which has been ongoing at Columbia University in New York for 1 week. Our North America correspondent Will Vernon is following developments from Washington.
There have also been arrests today at Indiana State University, 69 people, we understand, detained there. At Indiana University too. And negotiations are ongoing at Columbia University in New York over the protest camp there. And that's what really sparked this latest escalation in the protests, really. Pro-Palestinian demonstrations have been going on for several months now at a number of universities, but the mood's really changed in the last week or so. And that was because of an incident at Columbia. On the 18th of April, the NYPD were called onto the campus to take down a protest camp there. Dozens of people were arrested, and that really ignited tensions, and a number of other protest camps were then pitched at various universities across the country. Now, the protesters say that they're unhappy with the US government's support for the Israeli military campaign. They want a ceasefire in Gaza, but also they're demanding that their universities divest, so cut ties with companies with links to Israel. But many Jewish students say that they feel intimidated by these demos. There have been a number of reports of verbal assaults or even physical attacks on Jewish people by the pro-Palestinian demonstrators. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as many people in Congress here, say that these protests are anti-Semitic. Of course, the demonstrators deny that. And university administrators say that a lot of this trouble is being caused by radical outside elements that have infiltrated the ranks of the students. And that's certainly what we heard from Northeastern earlier today. They told us that whilst around 100 were detained, only about 12, or maybe a bit more than that, of them actually had student IDs. So many of them were not from the university at all.
Canada saw its first campus protest camp spring up Saturday at McGill University. The school in Montreal said such encampments, which are not permitted, increase the potential for escalation and confrontation. A plane linked to the Tesla chief Elon Musk has landed in Beijing. It's reported that Musk is to meet senior Chinese officials to discuss data and technology relating to electric vehicles. Tesla has been facing a price war with Chinese brands in the electric vehicle market. It has recently said it will lay off 10% of its global workforce. Well, we can now speak to our business reporter, David Waddell, who's in the BBC newsroom for us. So, David, a surprise visit from Mr. Musk there. What is he hoping to get from Chinese officials?
Well, he wants China to allow Tesla to release data that currently sits in Tesla's Shanghai servers. This relates to Tesla's full self-driving autonomous software for its vehicles, which it's rolled out in other parts of the world, most specifically in California, for its vehicles to operate autonomously with drivers behind the wheel but not actually operating the vehicles. Now, there's demand in China for Tesla to release that software into China, but the challenge for Mr. Musk and for Tesla more generally is that it wants to improve the software. In particular, it wants to drive those improvements with data from China, but that data is stuck in China and it's unable to improve and build upon the software in the way it would like. So those negotiations are expected to focus partly on that data, ensuring that it can build on that full self-driving software and get the software back into China.
And David, of course, Tesla's main competitors are Chinese companies. So would the Chinese government want to protect its own industry?
Yes, well, one of the Chinese companies is this, BYD. That's China's biggest EV automaker. There are others out there, the SAIC Motor Corporation, one of the smaller players, XPeng Motors. I was at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January and saw this vehicle in operation. It's a flying vehicle. XPeng is also releasing a very similar software to Tesla's full self-driving software. So they want to compete with Tesla, not only as EV vehicles, but also in their autonomous capabilities. And of course, some of them are flying too. So China wants to support its own auto industry, both domestically and internationally, because a lot of these vehicles now are being exported. So Tesla's exporting its own vehicles from the United States, China's exporting its vehicles from China. They're all competing not only in the domestic Chinese market, but also in the international market. So the challenge is to allow Tesla to trade in the way it would like to in China, but also for China to compete with them on the international stage.
And David, just talk us through the difficult position that Tesla has found itself in.
Yes, well, Tesla's had a few challenges of late. Its share price a few weeks ago had fallen by about 44% this year. It's risen a little bit, but it's still about a third short of where it was at the start of this year. It, in recent weeks, announced it would lay off 10,000 workers. That's somewhere in the region of 14,000 people worldwide. And of course, it's got these challenges competing on the international markets. We've discussed that, but that means it's reduced prices to compete with the cheaper Chinese competitors. So in the Chinese market in particular, it was announced in recent weeks they would reduce their car prices by about $2,000 or the equivalent of that. And also, I mentioned the full self-driving software. The price of that has been reduced by about a third, from $12,000 to $8,000. So the struggle is there to compete on that international stage and to do it in a way that allows it to deliver both volume and price.
David, thank you. That's the BBC's David Waddell there. Now, here in the UK, a Conservative MP has defected to the opposition Labour Party. Dan Poulter combines his political career with practicing medicine as an NHS doctor on a part-time basis. In an interview with Laura Kuenssberg, he cited health policy as the reason behind his change of party.
The Prime Minister under pressure, the doctor departing the Tory tribe. Dan Poulter has been a doctor and a Conservative MP for 14 years. But in that rare move, a political defection, he's quit and is joining Labour too.
I found it increasingly difficult to look my NHS colleagues in the eye, my patients in the eye and my constituents in the eye with good conscience. And I feel that the NHS deserves better than it has at the moment in terms of how it's run and governed.
Since 2010, though, constituents in your Suffolk home have chosen you, sent you to Westminster as a Conservative. Some of them might be angry that you have left the party that they chose. What do you say to them?
I thought about it and I thought, well, what's the best thing or the right thing to do? And on balance, I thought because there will be an election very, very soon, that it didn't make sense to have a by-election. I thought on balance it was better to continue to work diligently for my constituents through until the end of this Parliament.
A Conservative spokesperson said what Dan says is wrong. Sir Keir Starmer has no plan for our NHS. Under the Conservatives, we are raising NHS funding to a record £165 billion a year, helping it recover from the effects of the pandemic and driving forward its first ever long-term workforce plan. But last month, Lee Anderson walked away from the Tories to join the Reform Party. In 2022, Christian Wakeford quit to join Labour too. Defections create noise and disruption because they are so rare. So it's a damaging departure for the Conservatives when polls suggest voters are deserting too. Just days from council elections for millions. Another political accident that Rishi Sunak can ill afford. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News.
We just want to take you to these live pictures that we're getting into the newsroom from Venice, and the Pope is there. He has been conducting a service at the Church of Santa Maria Maddalena in Venice. Earlier today, the Pope has been meeting artists taking part in the Biennale Vatican Pavilion that's happening in Venice there. So those are pictures there of Pope Francis. Of course, there have been previous health scares surrounding the Pope, but today he looks happy, healthy, kissing babies there in Venice. And of course, he's been holding service at the Church of Santa Maria Maddalena, as well as meeting artists who are taking part in the Biennale Vatican Pavilion. A teenager who'd paid to be on the small boat crossing the channel earlier this week that resulted in tragedy has told the BBC he decided not to make the journey because he was worried about the number of people getting on board. An investigation is continuing into exactly what happened when violence broke out, resulting in the death of 5 people, including a young girl. Our correspondent John Donnison reports from Calais.
Chaos, desperation and violence as more than 100 people tried to cram onto a small boat in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Among them was 16-year-old Marcus, not his real name, from South Sudan.
And where are you? Where are you here?
I'm behind this side.
On that side?
Yeah, on that side.
5 people were killed, including a 7-year-old girl.
And how did people die?
There were too many people. They were crushed maybe. I didn't see them dying. I just wanted to save myself. 30 or 40 guys were trying to force themselves on the boat because they did not pay the money.
Marcus, who's fleeing life as a child soldier in South Sudan, says he paid people smugglers $1,000 to make the crossing. And even though he was injured in the last attempt, he's willing to pay more to try again.
You can see today that the sea is calm and the wind has dropped, and that means more attempted crossings. Here you've got a boat that's been abandoned. It looks like the police have slashed it open. You've also got a tear gas canister which police have been using and some abandoned children's clothing. Despite the dangers, people like Marcus are not going to give up.
And what of the government's Rwanda policy?
The government's saying they will deport people who cross to Rwanda. Does that worry you?
That will not stop me. I will never give up. I will try my best to cross the English Channel.
And the chance came sooner than we expected. After we left Marcus this morning, we heard he'd headed to the beaches once more for another attempt to reach the UK. John Donnison, BBC News in Calais.
The UN Security Council has expressed deep concern over an imminent attack on the Sudanese city of El Fasher by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. El Fasher is the last big city in the Darfur region, where Sudan's army is still holding out against the RSF, who've been accused of carrying out a wave of violence against non-Arab ethnic groups. Residents in El Fasher are said to be afraid for their lives should they attempt to flee.
Civilians are trapped in the city, the only one in Darfur still in the hands of the SAF, afraid of being killed should they attempt to flee. This dire situation is compounded by a severe shortage of essential supplies, as deliveries of commercial goods and humanitarian aid have been heavily constrained by the fighting. The High Commissioner calls for an immediate de-escalation of this catastrophic situation, an end to the conflict that has ravaged the country for more than a year now, and investigation of all alleged violations and abuses of international human rights law and violations of international humanitarian law.
Let's get some of the day's other news now. Officials in Kenya have warned people to brace themselves for even heavier rainfall as severe downpours continue to batter parts of East Africa. At least 76 people have been killed by flooding in recent weeks and more than 130,000 displaced. The extreme weather has also wreaked havoc across neighbouring Tanzania, Burundi and Uganda. A tornado has ripped through the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou, killing at least 5 people and injuring more than 30 others. Officials said 140 factories were damaged, while residential properties were largely unscathed. The city is the capital of the heavily industrialized Guangdong province, where flooding following torrential rain claimed 4 lives earlier this week. Iraq's parliament has passed a law imposing heavy sentences for sex acts deemed to promote moral depravity. It criminalizes same-sex relations with up to 15 years in prison, while anyone promoting homosexuality or prostitution faces a 7-year term. Transgender people will be sentenced to between 1 and 3 years in jail, as will any doctor performing gender reassignment surgery. A British man who was attacked by a bull shark just 10 metres off the coast of the Caribbean island of Tobago is in a stable condition. 64-year-old Peter Smith has serious injuries to his left arm, left leg and stomach after the attack on Friday. Aruna Yanga reports.
A perfect Caribbean getaway that turned to horror. Peter Smith was on the beach in front of the Starfish Hotel in Tobago. The retired IT worker was on holiday with his wife and friends. He'd been due to fly back to the UK on Friday before he took a last swim in the sea. Peter Smith suffered severe injuries to his left arm, leg and stomach. He's currently recovering in hospital in Tobago.
And they were in about waist deep to shoulder high water, so they weren't out of their depth. And I think their backs were turned and they were just kind of lounging around, and nobody saw the shark coming. You know, and even while the shark was around and doing the attack, the other people in the water were physically trying to fight off the shark.
It's believed Mr. Smith was attacked by a bull shark. They're found in shallow waters along tropical coastlines. Authorities say they've a vital role in protecting coral reefs.
We will see sharks pop up from time to time. It is part of their job, but it is our job to ensure we can keep you safe, while at the same time we keep our environment safe.
Officials closed several beaches and coastal areas between Plymouth on the north coast and Crown Point on the western tip. The Foreign Office is supporting Mr. Smith and his family. Aruna Iyengar, BBC News.
SpaceX has launched its Falcon 9 rocket.
3, 2, 1. Ignition. Engines full power and liftoff. Go Galileo.
So this was the moment it took off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, carrying a payload of 2 Galileo satellites, part of Europe's global navigation satellite system. Notably, this was the first time an American-made rocket was used and launched from US soil for the joint SpaceX-European Commission project. Historically, the Galileo satellites were launched using the Russian Soyuz or Ariane 5 rockets, but the European Space Agency stopped using Soyuz since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, earlier we told you about the protests outside the annual White House Correspondents Association dinner in Washington. President Biden delivered an election year comedy roast in front of journalists, celebrities and politicians, and made fun of himself and his rival, Donald Trump.
Of course, the 2024 election is in full swing. And yes, age is an issue. I'm a grown man running against a 6-year-old.
Stay with us on BBC News.
Hello there. The atmosphere across the southeast of Europe is looking a lot clearer than it was a few days ago. High pressure continues to bring plenty of sunshine here. Low pressure sweeping up the western side of the continent, like to bring some heavy rain and strong winds to France, the Low Countries, the UK and Ireland as we move through part 2 of the weekend. Another front bringing some wet weather from the Balearics up in towards southern France. So an unsettled theme towards western areas. Few showers around the Black Sea area, but otherwise warm and sunny, with temperatures closer to the seasonal average for the eastern Mediterranean. Plenty of sunshine for Greece, the islands, Italy into Sicily and also for Malta. But Iberia looks a lot more unsettled, certainly central northern areas up into France, the UK, the Low Countries, parts of Germany, Denmark and in towards Scandinavia. Still quite chilly across northern areas, but temperatures recovering across this northwest corner. Although it'll be unsettled even as we head into Monday, it'll scoop up some warmer air across this area. So temperatures rising, high teens there for London, close to 20 degrees for Paris. Warmest of the weather towards central and eastern southeast Europe. Stays quite unsettled in Ireland, I think, for the upcoming week. Generally on the mild side, plenty of sunshine there for Copenhagen, though, with that high pressure dominating. Few showers likely in Cyprus as we move through the new week, otherwise mostly dry and sunny.
Normally my day begins by changing my t-shirt. It's soaking wet from the sweat from the nightmares. As a person suffering from mental illness, I and other people are invisible. They're embarrassed by mental illness, and that's the stigma is vast.
Life for me has changed since I got my diagnosis. While, I am married, I also paint, have a house, my friends. If medical assistance in dying had been available back during those times where things were really, really low, like there was no hope, I wouldn't be here today.
It's the one thing I believe I have to do, to advocate for the mentally ill and advocate for a proper way for assisted death for the mentally ill.
I used to work the whole day when I was pregnant. I wouldn't take much rest. I remember being thirsty all the time and out of breath.
Saved my life.
Acabamos de llegar al lugar donde va a comenzar la búsqueda del migrante desaparecido.
زنایی که فقط باید سکوت کنن، هیچ کس نباید صدایشان رو بشنوه، صدای گپشان رو بشنوه. ما تصمیم گرفتیم که در اونجا باید صدامون رو به شکل آهنگ بیرون کنیم.
Just because we've got a disability doesn't mean that we are children. We are adults and with hopes and dreams like everybody has. Without sports, none of us would be here.
Inspiring short films from the BBC.
The future is already here.
All about AI changing our jobs.
From gadgets to gaming.
May the best driver win. It won't be me. Sustainability to AI.
Giant nets and AI robots to deal with plastic pollution.
The latest developments from the world of tech.
A floating solar farm, and it's a pretty impressive sight.
Wow! That went right through me!
Click on BBC News.
This is BBC News, the headlines. Israel says a planned ground assault on the city of Rafah could be suspended if a deal emerges to free the hostages still held by Hamas. It comes hours after Hamas released a video of 2 hostages. US police in riot gear clash with students staging sit-ins at university campuses. It's the latest escalation in a wave of pro-Palestinian protests around the country. Students are calling for colleges to boycott companies with ties to Israel. Iraq's parliament criminalizes same-sex relations with up to 15 years in prison, while anyone promoting homosexuality faces a 7-year term. Transgender people will also be sentenced to jail time, as will any doctor performing same-sex surgeries. And a gold pocket watch worn by the wealthiest passenger on the Titanic has become the shipwreck's most expensive item ever bought at auction. The timepiece, owned by John Jacob Astor, sold for more than £1 million. Let's get more on our top story from the Middle East, where Israel's foreign minister has said a planned ground assault on the southern city of Rafah could be suspended if a deal emerges to free the hostages still held by Hamas. Israel Katz said their freedom was a top priority. Hostage release also forms a key part of international mediation efforts to bring about a ceasefire in the Gaza war. Hamas has posted a new video which shows 2 of the hostages captured during its October attack. Keith Saigon and Omri Miran both identify themselves. While the video is not dated, there is a reference to the recent Passover holiday. It's the second such video that Hamas, considered a terror group by the UK and the US governments, has published in the past few days. We can go live now to Cairo and speak to the Ambassador Mohammed Hegazi, former assistant to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Egypt. Thank you for joining us on BBC News. I want to start by asking you about the planned visit by the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to the region. What do you think he'll be trying to achieve on this visit?
Well, it is a planned visit to attend the World Economic Forum in Riyadh, but definitely the situation in the Middle East and in Gaza will be in the heart of the discussion between the world leader, including Secretary Blinken, who will definitely culminate the many communications and efforts and developments that has occurred since his last 5th visit to the region. So I believe that it is very important visit in the final stage of the race between two scenarios. The one that Netanyahu and the right-wing government is preferring is to dwell the situation more and to drag it into more violence by claiming the incursion into Rafah. And this of the world community expressed in the declaration of the 17th day before yesterday, and yesterday with the Arab regional group, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Gulf states, Jordan, who has clearly manifested their call for a ceasefire, exchange of prisoners, reconstruction, and a political solution. This is the core also of the Egyptian suggested final solution that has been transmitted by an Egyptian security delegation to Tel Aviv day before yesterday. And I think it has been transmitted also to Hamas. And everybody, as you said, stated in your report, Israel Katz, the Foreign Minister of Israel has changed tone, as well as many of the Israelis has now demonstrated clearly in the streets of Tel Aviv yesterday their wish that in this Easter holiday season we will all celebrate the ceasefire, the exchange of prisoners.
Yes, and Ambassador, I just want to ask you about the visit by this Egyptian delegation to Israel. I understand that you're in touch with some members of the delegation. What's they telling you about their visit, and is it possible that a ceasefire deal could be imminent?
I believe that, as I said, the race between the two scenarios has been with us for some time. The pressure by the Israelis to encourage or to intrude the question of fighting with Iran or to play the Iranian factor. The American administration, President Biden himself, said that the war with Iran is not an Israeli decision tacitly. I think we all believe that the comprehensive paper that has been submitted to the parties, Hamas and the Israelis, is quite comprehensive, and the Egyptian, Qatari, US-sponsored dialogue has, I think, brought us to a shore of a conclusion where everybody has to understand that dragging the situation into more violence by incursion into Rafah, or before that by the Israeli attempt to include Iran into the equation, has failed, and time has come that we all realize that the life of the prisoners is on the stake, and unless the Israelis abide and agree that many Israeli military resignation will play a factor, the Israeli public opinion and the demonstration in the streets of Tel Aviv daily now is a clear manifestation that everybody from a regional point of view, the Arab leaders meeting in Riyadh yesterday, and the American 17 members' declaration has shown the will of the international community to stop this violence that brought us to truly, as has been described by Francesca Albanese, the delegate to human rights in the occupied territory, to a genocide, a clear genocide. And I think when we look at the situation in Gaza, I recall what has been said, that this is a betrayal of humanity. And I think time has come that we return back to listen to the reason and to listen even to the spirit of our youth in all the American and the British as well as the European universities, who remind us that there is a limit.
And I just want to put some news that's coming into the newsroom from Riyadh, where the Palestinian President Abbas has said that he believes Israel will stage an invasion of Rafah in the coming days. What's your reaction to that? Do you think that's a possibility now?
Look, we are in a negotiation process. Everybody is using his tools and cards. And I think the Israeli playing the card of Rafah to pressure the Palestinian situation. I don't think that the Biden administration would like to drag us into 5 more or 6 more months of violence till the Israeli complete the carnage. And I think they will look at the election, the American election, as a decisive factor where President Biden and his administration would like also to come with a legacy. He himself said that I will liberate the prisoners. How would he do that? And everybody knows that incursion into Rafah will only play in the hand of the war Mongols and the radical right-wingers and settlements. All what we are looking is a reason. Europe has to play a role. And I don't think that the American administration will allow the Israeli right wing to drag the situation till the American election, where I think they will be joined by the right wingers and conservatives on the Republican side in November. So I think this release is also important for Biden to create his legacy before election.
Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us here on BBC News. That's Ambassador Mohammed Hegazi. And just to bring you some more lines from the speech there by the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas speaking in Riyadh, he has said the US is the only country that is able to stop Israel from attacking Rafah. He also said, I'm worried Israel will try to push Palestinians out of the West Bank after it's done with Gaza. So those are obviously comments there by the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Now, the former Speaker of the US House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, has told the BBC that pro-Palestinian student protesters across America should channel some of their enthusiasm towards recognizing Hamas as a terrorist organization. Ms. Pelosi has been speaking to Laura Kunsberg about that and other topics.
There's complete justification for speaking out against what is happening there. What's happening in Gaza, it just challenges the conscience of the world. The starvation, the dehydration, the malnutrition, and now rising in some parts of Gaza, famine that almost is unforgivable in terms of the toll it takes on children. In our country, though, we would like to see some of that enthusiasm recognize Hamas as a terrorist organization that did a barbaric thing in Israel on October 7th. Israel has a right to defend itself. The manner in which they are doing it is really challenging because Netanyahu has never been an agent for peace. I'm not a big fan of his, but he couldn't have done things worse than tens of thousands, whatever the figure may be, of people dying, children malnourished, and the uncertainty that is there. And that's what people are speaking out about.
But do you understand why young people are protesting in such a way? Are the tactics being used on campuses the right ones?
When they go beyond campuses and block the Golden Gate Bridge or something for a long period of time, and people can't go to the doctor or the hospital or to whatever is urgent in their lives, it doesn't win favor. It doesn't win favor. It may attract press, but it does not attract favor. I mean, how can you ever criticize demonstrations on campuses? That's a way of life for us in America.
There is so much at stake right now, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in terms of what's going on in Ukraine. And you talk very passionately about the need to defend democracy. One of the things you've argued very strongly for is against the social media platform TikTok. The US has now taken strong action against that. But what do you think is the answer to the problem of democracy being under such strain?
Well, I think that the TikTok issue was a security issue. And it got the biggest vote of any of the votes on Saturday, 380 votes in the bill that had that in there to entice people to their point of view. But the most important thing we can do is to support the people in Ukraine who are fighting for their democracy, and in doing so, for democracy writ large. What we have to do in the United States is win the election. We win the election because there are elements on the other side that are undermining principles of democracy in our own country and not supportive of democracy elsewhere.
Yet what concerns Americans most is inflation, job creation, and immigration. And when you look at the polling, former President Trump leads President Biden in those three categories very significantly. So are voters wrong? If the current president's record is so good, why aren't people convinced?
Well, the polls may be wrong. Why are we identifying people with the polls? That the polls were wrong in the last election. They said we're going to lose 30 or 40 seats in the congressional races. We lost 5 in New York, and we'll win them back. Joe Biden will win. His numbers are improving, if polls mean that much. His numbers are improving. But the thing is that elections are campaigns. That's a war term, and that's what we're in. We decide to win. We make every decision in favor of winning. We marshal our forces, our strength, and that's all going very well for us. So I do think that we could do better in convincing people that what Joe Biden did in creating 9 million jobs, as opposed to a former president who lost more jobs than any president in history, was to make that message clear.
But this election does feel very much in the balance. You say for the sake of democracy, you have to win.
And we will.
But many people seem ready to turn to Donald Trump again because they don't feel they have a good alternative. And there are plenty of loyal Democrat voters and many undecideds who aren't convinced by President Biden.
In terms of democracy, of course, that's related, but it's not central to it, except if, depending on what the Chinese government is doing with the algorithms and the rest of that.
Whether that's because of his gaffes, or whether that's because of his age, or whether that's because of his visible frailty, Democrats sometimes worry that he's not a commander-in-chief in a time of war and real threats. What do you say to that?
I see it differently. I see a president who has a vision for America that is a great one, is strong. I see a president who knows, because he's been there, has the experience, gained the wisdom from his age and being there, that he knows what will work. And he knows how to do it because he's been a legislator a long time. And most importantly, what's in his heart for the American people, more empathy than you can name. And that has to come across in the elections.
You don't think then his visible frailty is an issue? You don't think it's a problem?
I don't get the point. This is a great American president. He's younger than I am, so I don't know what the point is about age.
It's a question about frailty, though, isn't it? There's never a question about whether Janet Yellen's too old for the job, or there's not. It doesn't seem to be a question about President Trump's age. People often look at President Biden and they wonder about his frailty. But I know that you know him well.
Well,
does it make him cross?
They're voting for him in the election. When people see him, they come back and they say, why do people say that about him? He has humor and vitality and knowledge and recognition. I had somebody ask me about him, and I said, we just had him in San Francisco for an event. He gave a fabulous presentation, no notes. He met the people in the photo line and then saw them at the table and remembered them. No name tags. And he was funny, no kidding.
During the years of President Trump, politics in America became more and more toxic, it seemed, almost every day. You were called Crazy Nancy repeatedly. Your own husband was attacked during that period by someone who demonized you. Do you have fear of a Donald Trump return to the White House?
Yes, for many reasons. Political, policy, personally for many people, because he's out to get. But you said they called me crazy. Understand this about the other guy. He's a master of projection. You call it Hillary Crooked Hilton. Hillary, he's got how many? 96 felony charges. He calls Joe Sleepy Joe. He's asleep in court in his own trial. He calls me Crazy Nancy, and he's crazier than you would ever want to know as somebody who had been president of the United States. But the beat goes on. Every time he calls somebody something, you know he recognizes what he is, and he thinks that's a weakness, so he'll project it on somebody else. So when you said that guy attacked my husband, demonized me, no, the Republican Party demonized me. Donald Trump demonized me.
But being here, having a conversation about defending democracy, though, do you think voters are wrong if they find President Trump an appealing prospect? Are voters wrong if they want to vote for him again? Are they wrong if they want to vote for the Republican Party in 2024?
Well, it's not a question of whether they're wrong. We just disagree. It's interesting. exploited the populism message, and then went into the office and passed one bill giving 83% of the benefit, a tax bill that gave 83% of the benefits to the top 1%, adding $2 trillion to the national debt, and then complaining if we want to feed the children.
His role abroad, though, two of our former Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, have both said the world was safer under Donald Trump. What do you say to them?
I don't know what they're talking about, and it may be in their interest to talk about that. I didn't know they said that, and I'm sorry they did. Because safer for what? Safer for billionaires not to have to pay taxes, safer people who dislike people of color and LGBTQ and women in a rising situation. Safer for what? Safer for white men? Safer for white people? What was it safer for? I came from Baltimore. A national anthem was written there, and my favorite line in it is, "Proof through the night that our flag was still there." And that flag is our symbol of democracy, with liberty and justice for all. Not for tax breaks for the wealthiest people in America or discrimination against people of color. Liberty and justice for all.
That was the former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi speaking to Laura Kunsberg. A gold pocket watch worn by the wealthiest passenger on the Titanic has sold for almost £1 million at auction. Once fees are added, it's the highest price ever paid at auction for a single item recovered from the scene of the disaster in 1912. A leather violin bag owned by the leader of the orchestra, which famously played on as the ship sank, fetched £290,000. Duncan Kennedy reports.
105,000. There's nothing like the Titanic to evoke memories, passion and buyers. This auction included one of the items that Titanic collectors desire most of all. It's the gold pocket watch belonging to a passenger believed to be one of the richest people in the world, John Jacob Astor. He and 1,500 others died when the ship sank in April 1912 in the North Atlantic.
What J.J. Astor's watch represents is something touchable from history, which is why people are still willing to pay so much money for it.
The bidding for the watch started way beyond the estimate of £150,000 and kept climbing.
At £900,000.
Add on all the fees and the anonymous buyer will pay £1.17 million, a world record for an item from the Titanic.
At the end of the day, this price reflects not only the importance of the Astor watch, but also the enduring appeal of the Titanic story.
Books, films and documentaries have kept the Titanic story alive, but it's artefacts like these that make it tangible and desirable. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News in Wiltshire.
Now let's head to Venice and these live pictures where the Pope is holding Mass at the Church of Santa Maria Maddalena in Venice. This is a visit by the Pope to the city, his first since he became pontiff in 2013. Earlier in the day, the Pope flew directly into a women's prison where the Vatican has set up a multimedia exhibition that is part of the Venice Biennale. This is the prestigious international art show. So this is the Pope's visit to Venice. He's been holding Mass there, and it's actually a Pope's first visit to the Biennale. Now, it's almost 70 years since Donald Campbell became the fastest man on water in his iconic hydroplane Bluebird, smashing the 200 miles per hour barrier in front of crowds and on the shores of Ullswater in the Lake District. Now, previously unseen photos of the Daredevil in action back in 1955 have been discovered, and the search is on for somewhere to display them permanently. Andy Gill reports.
That is the difference here. That people were allowed, which
just to come down on the shoreline. I mean, that must have been the whole village.
At her home in Southport in Merseyside, Gina Campbell and Andrew Price look through photos of Donald Campbell and Bluebird. They were taken at Ullswater in Cumbria in 1955, the place and year when Donald Campbell first broke the world water speed record. The photographer was Andrew's dad, Peter Price, who died in 2020.
it was very difficult for me to go through his archive because I'd worked with him for 30 years.
Must be millions of photos.
I started to go through things, but it was, tears were rolling down my eyes. Said, I didn't know you'd done this, Dad. I didn't know you'd done that.
But earlier this year, Andrew, who's also a photographer, did get round to looking through his dad's archive.
Literally there they were in a little brown envelope with handwritten notes on saying Donald Campbell Bluebird early attempt Ullswater. And I was, wow, I didn't know you had these.
Once you start on one of these world's record attempts, you're past the point of no return.
Donald Campbell set world water and land speed records. He died in 1967 when Bluebird crashed on Coniston Water. Last month, the restored boat returned to Coniston after being recovered in 2001. But Campbell's first water speed records were achieved not on Coniston, but on Ullswater.
There's one here, he's obviously just going out for a run, but he's not wearing a hard helmet.
No, he's not.
Would he have had that in the cockpit, do you think?
For Gina, who was just 6 when the photos were taken, they reveal a new chapter of her father's life.
My jaw dropped when I first saw them. What it tells me is how famous my father was, looking at the crowds that were there. And me, as a small child, no idea that my father was famous. I did not know my father was famous.
Gina and Andrew both now want the photos to find a permanent home, a testament to a pioneering British enterprise in engineering and daring.
It sort of gets me in my heart because it shows my dad to me what he was that I didn't know.
Andy Gill, BBC News.
Now, the grand final of one of the world's biggest competitive gaming competitions will take place later in Birmingham today, with one team of professional gamers set to win a share of the £800,000 prize pot. The ESL One tournament sees teams from all over the world compete in the multiplayer battle arena game Dota 2. It takes place in front of thousands of people, with players potentially winning life-changing amounts of money. An impressive competition and prize money. You're watching BBC News with me, Catherine Byaruhanga. Stay with us.
Hello there. Violent storms have been sweeping the central plains of the United States in the last 24 hours. We've had reports of tornadoes, very large hail stretching from Texas up towards Nebraska. This system is continuing to move its way eastwards gradually, but it's going to affect much of the Midwest, the Great Lakes for part 2 of the weekend. Again, there could be some damaging storms. Warm and sunny to the southeast, a lot of dry weather across the west coast, but on the fairly cool side for the Pacific Northwest up into British Columbia. Much of Mexico and Central America will see some sunshine, a few showers around, some heavy thundery downpours in towards Panama, Costa Rica and into Venezuela. And those showers also extending into Colombia, Ecuador, parts of northern Peru, where they will be pretty heavy with the risk of some flooding here during the course of Sunday. Much of the south will be dry, particularly for Argentina into central Chile, and quite warm as well. Now, we've lost the dust across the southeast of Europe. It's been replaced by some fresher and cooler westerly winds. There's still a few showers around across the east of Europe, but some of the heaviest of the rainfall will be across Iberia into France, the Low Countries pushing in towards the UK and Ireland on Sunday. For North Africa, plenty of dry, settled weather for Sunday. Temperatures not as hot in Cairo as what we had at the end of last week, back closer to normal, around 30-31 degrees, but it is hot there in Khartoum. Still further showers, and heavy at times for coastal Tanzania and Kenya, but I don't think anything quite as heavy as what we have had. And we continue to see a few showers across the Middle East and the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. These likely to continue through Sunday and into Monday. The odd heavy one could be ruled out, and they will kick up some dust and sand. For South Asia, it's a dry picture for most. Those temperatures really building now into the low 40s quite widely in the north and northeast, setting off a few heavy thundery showers as well. And we continue with the heavy rains through central southern China in towards Taiwan and the islands to the south of Japan. Anywhere in that zone I mentioned could see some flooding downpours again on Monday, but it is hot again for Southeast Asia 38-39 for Bangkok. Similar values in Manila as well. But Indonesia, Malaysia will see the shower clouds and thunderstorms developing through the afternoon. A lot of dry weather across Australia for Monday. Few showers peppering the far southeast of New South Wales. Otherwise, mostly dry. New Zealand will have a dry slot on Monday before more rain arrives for Tuesday and Wednesday. Bye-bye.
I think if I look back to when I came out, when I was 22, a couple of years before, gay marriage was a thing that you could do.
There's a couple of teachers who are like LGBT trained.
What extra happy Tuesday? I didn't come out till I was in my 20s. Yeah, that was a difficult time for me.
I always knew I was gay, so I actually saw all of my siblings get married one by one.
We've a decade since that law changed.
Society's changed, the expectations have changed.
I'm interested to know whether gay marriage has changed things as much as it seems like it might have.
There's still so much work to be done to try and fight for our rights to be able to get married in a church.
I guess it's how equal is equal marriage.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Israel's foreign minister says his country's military could suspend its planned incursion into Rafah if hostages are released. The Conservative MP Daniel Poulter defects to Labour, saying he disagrees with the Conservative Party's health policies. The Tesla chief Elon Musk has landed in Beijing, where he's expected to meet Chinese officials to discuss electric vehicles. And a gold pocket watch worn by the wealthiest passenger on the Titanic sells for 6 times the asking price. Hello, I'm Catherine Byaruhanga. We start in the Middle East, where efforts are being made to try to bring about a ceasefire in southern Gaza. Israel's foreign minister has said a planned ground assault on the southern Gaza city of Rafah could be suspended if a deal emerges to free the hostages still held by Hamas. Israel Katz said their freedom was a top priority. Hamas has posted a new video which shows 2 of the hostages captured during its October attack, Keith Saigon, Omri Miran, both identifying themselves. While the video is not dated, there is a reference to the recent Passover holiday. It's the second such video that Hamas, considered a terror organization by the UK and US governments, has published in the past few days. Our correspondent Anna Foster sent this update from Tel Aviv.
Omri Miran's father was actually already on the list of confirmed speakers for this event tonight. When he got up on the stage, he talked about the moment. He said he was sitting having coffee with someone and talking about his grandchildren when the man that he was talking to held his phone and said, "Look, here's a video." They've released a video of Omri. Now, what was also interesting as the crowd were gathered here tonight is they showed that video in full. It's not something that normally happens because, of course, when you see the people in it, the 2 men in this case looking very malnourished, obviously speaking under duress, sending messages to their families and urging the Israeli government to come to some sort of arrangement, some sort of deal to try and achieve their release. Now, of course, that deal and those talks have been going on for weeks and weeks now. The last time we saw a significant hostage release was at the end of last year. At one point, we were told the talks had really very much broken down. The 2 sides weren't really in communication at all. But the Egyptian delegation's visit this week and the further efforts of the US and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, we're sort of led to believe, the briefings are, that perhaps they're moving slightly closer in terms of trying to achieve a deal. But certainly those powerful messages that we heard on the stage tonight from the hostage families, they were talking directly to Israel's leaders, directly to the politicians, and they were saying you need to do a deal. While they're still alive, while we know that our loved ones are still alive, you need to do what they can to ensure their release now.
Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to travel to Saudi Arabia on Monday as negotiations between Israel and Hamas remain in limbo. This will be his 7th trip to the Middle East since the war began. It is part of President Biden's efforts to encourage a ceasefire and prevent the conflict from spreading. He will also call for the release of hostages from the October the 7th attack. A little earlier, I spoke to Dr. Aaron Bregman from the Department of War Studies at King's College London. I asked him what he thinks Hamas is trying to achieve by releasing those 2 hostage videos.
Well, first of all, very good news for the families, because they can see that the loved ones are still alive. And the message of Hamas is basically, here you have the